A show for you tonight. Unusual. We're going visual. This is my dear friend Tim Ahern, who's written many things. Finnegan's Wake, illustrated the first chapter. If you're reading Finnegan's Wake, it's a must. And
another one there.
Another one. Encouraging you to get to the last chapter, also illustrated. Tim and I and his wife and 3 other people, have been reading these 2 books for about 20 years,
Easily.
Word for word. But we're not going to be into words tonight.
No.
We are going to be into visuals. Let's take a look at this. You just press it.
Do you want to look at one of them?
Yep. Wow. Well, I'm uncharacteristically speechless. Tim has done a series of paintings, 36 ways of looking at Mount Rainier. You're from Seattle.
Correct.
And this is way number 1. We can sit now.
So this one starts the series off in a Japanese garden that's pretty well known in Seattle. It's near the Arboretum. And I chose that because you might be familiar with another series of paintings called 36 Views of Mount Fuji by Hokusai. And last summer, I was out in Seattle and I was doing some hiking and climbing and sketching and hit upon the idea of maybe doing a similar series, but of our great mountain, Mount Rainier.
Now, could we slow that down and maybe, can we have us come through the painting? Do you remember how to do that?
I can try.
Yes.
There we are. The whole painting went away.
It's not even,
There
there
we
we are. Wow.
Psychedelic, huh?
Yes. So, can you slow down and tell me what went on when you were inspired to do these? This is a big project.
It was. But I've had a long life connection to Mount Rainier because, first of all, anybody who lives out in that area, if the weather's good, chances are sometime during the day you'll get a view of it because it just is lording over the whole region in terms of visual
That must be
influence.
Wow, so you know it's there and then sometimes it comes.
Yeah, a lot of times it's shrouded in clouds, but on a great day it's magnificent.
And people have said that about God, the same. We know God is there, but we can't quite experience it now.
Yeah, you're describing the weather in Seattle very well.
And so I want to hear more, because you really took what went on when you were inspired to do this.
So, yes, so I lived in Japan for a while after I grew up in Seattle, and became very interested in Japanese culture and art. And Hokusai is one of their famous woodblock printmakers or artists, and he did a series that was famous even in his time and really catapulted his career. I mean, he was well known, but this one really sealed his fame. And it's you're probably more familiar with one of them than the others, and it's called The Great Wave.
Yes. Oh, that's part of it.
In The Great Wave, and the crest of the wave is falling like this, and the people are in the boats are huddled for their lives, scared out of their wits here. And right in the middle, you can hardly see it, is Mount Fuji. Then he played all sorts of little perspective games through the whole 36 Views of Mount Fuji in his series.
And you are very moved by this. Even your Finnegan's Wake love is many different ways of seeing the same characters.
That's true. I mean, you have to in that book because Joyce is constantly changing the
Everybody's
shapes of the
changing
characters. They're changing roles.
Into the water, to a river.
Yes, yes.
So,
Yeah, that was good practice.
So the something. So, let's go back to the moment you were in the seed of your inspiration to do this, and just describe to me where you are and what you're feeling and thinking.
So the way it started was I was in Seattle, and I have these two grandnieces, I guess you'd call them. They're like, they're like 5 and 7, something like that. And we were just watercoloring because they like to do it. I like to do it. And I just chose a picture of Mount Rainier. And in 10 minutes, I had sketched something out. It's not part of the series. But I thought, gosh, that was fun. And it was really effective. I was impressed by how much of the mountain it could capture in 10 minutes time. And then I put it aside and I was doing other things. And then I went on a climb, and during the climb we could see Mount Rainier, and I was sketching Mount Rainier out in the mountains, and that was interesting. And then I came back to Massachusetts where I live. And then I was just thinking, gosh, I'm retiring this year. I've got all the time in the world. Why don't I just sit down and do 36 paintings? It was something I've never done before, anything that extensive, because, I had work and responsibilities and whatever. And I just sort of holed up for like 4 or 5 months. And sometimes I was doing 3 paintings at a time.
Wow.
Which was really interesting way to paint, because a lot of times when one paints, you get stuck. Like maybe the painting is going so well that you don't want to make that one mistake that messes it up.
Oh, this is watercolor?
Watercolor.
Oh, this is do or die.
And so you can get all tense about a painting as it's going along. So it's nice to just put that aside, work on the other one. Maybe you're like filling out the big washes of color or something, so that nothing can get too damaged in that. And then you go on to the third one, get inspired with something else. Then you go back to the first one and finish it up, and you're in a much better mood to address that painting. And they keep moving. So like every week I could do like 3 of these at one point. And it was just wonderful. I listened to all of the operas of Richard Strauss.
While painting?
Yes.
Well, why don't we, I hate to leave this, but just to give our audience a taste of what's to come.
Yeah.
Let's show them 1 or 2 more views, since you're doing 3 a day.
So, just to talk a little more about this one, is that I chose it because it was a Japanese theme of the garden, so that sort of refers to hokusai, and then you could get all those beautiful colors of the different trees and flowers and everything. Now, Mount Rainier is in that direction from the garden, but there's a hill that would obscure it. It would never be reflected in the pond the way it's shown here, but I figure it's close enough. The mountain is in the right place, and let's just imagine that it could actually be reflected. And just to make a little aside, some friends of mine wanted to write haikus for these things. So,
wow, what lovely friends you have.
So they wrote the following one about this. Ancient garden forms in the mirror of my mind, Rainier in the pond. And it sort of harkens to that frog jumping in the pond of that famous haiku.
Oh.
But the one thing I just wanted to point out here is that this series asks you to look at Rainier in new and novel ways, and sort of to enrich your experience of the mountain, and having it actually being reflected in this Japanese pond is part of that.
And show us 1 or 2 more.
Sure. All I have to do is remember how to do that.
Tim just learned a few minutes ago how to do this.
Oh, Wrong
Wow,
way.
that's the last one.
Okay, so
Oh my, I love this one too. Yes.
this is Seattle. And on the left there, in that dark green, that's where the Arboretum is. That's where the Japanese garden is. You can't see it. It's not depicted in this painting. But the idea here is that in the second painting, we're sort of zooming out of the first painting to get a larger perspective. And you actually, this is a fairly, in terms of the way things are laid out, this is the way an aerial view of Mount Rainier would look from an airplane or a helicopter. And there are a lot of great aerial views that I found very useful to help put this painting together.
Love it.
And
Go ahead.
well, it's sort of an admixture. Some parts of the city are in, decent detail, like the downtown there, and the piers around Lake Union, which is the body of water to the far right, and maybe you see the Space Needle there to the far right. But a lot of the greenery is almost like what you might see in the early dawn, and you can't really see the buildings there, the houses, the rooftops, but there are a lot of structures there that I did not paint.
These really touched me. I wish I could articulate it. I see a giant critter, maybe a whale, with a big open mouth on the left. Those two green swatches.
Oh, like these giant shapes?
Yes.
I see what you're saying. Huh. Yeah. And then there's a little golden light there behind
Oh my
the
God.
city at the bottom
I
of
don't know why these are so not just soothing, but even into themselves, each one of them is so much is going on. There's the city, the greenery, the mountain, the ocean, the different colors,
Mm.
and well, this is a little ominous to me with the big mouth, but very, it's even playful.
Oh, I like that. I like that reading of it.
Paul Klee would be proud. And one more.
Okay, so this is the beginning of a large trip that we're going to do around the mountain. But before we go around the mountain, we're going to pull out even further. So we're going, the perspective is from behind Mount Baker, which is the one on the far right there, or the near right. And we're near up by the Canadian border, looking back at all the volcanoes that you can see in this area. So this is the volcanoes of Washington, Mount Baker. The little one in the sea of blue is Glacier Peak. The big grayish blue one is Mount Rainier, of course. And the far right in the background is Mount St. Helens. That's why it doesn't have a top any longer. It was blown
Oh
off.
my, yes, I remember.
And then there's a sort of a Mount Rainier look-alike on the left there. It's Mount Adams. And in the far distance in the background is Mount Hood in Oregon.
And Rainier was named Mount Rainier. Would you know why?
We'll talk about that a little later, but George Vancouver was the first British explorer to see the mountain, and he named it after somebody he knew.
Oh my!
Another admiral,
Wow.
Admiral Rainier.
Oh my!
You want to see another one?
Sure.
So now we're going to begin our tour around the mountain. So we're going to go down the left side in this picture. This is the eastern side. Approach it, and then climb up it, go down it, and circle around it, and come back to Seattle. And this is a very impressionistic painting of Lake Sammamish, which is actually within the borders of the metropolis of Seattle, Greater Seattle, and it has a lot of houses on it. But I chose to paint it with these wild, untamed swaths of blue and green to sort of depict all the glacial till that it was actually formed by. There was a giant glacier that covered this whole area, and left these big mounds of gravel and till. And
what is till again?
it's like the sand and boulders and
Mhm.
whatever left by these huge forces, these continental glaciers and everything. And it left this little lake there. But you can see that we're getting closer to Mount Rainier. We're coming back towards it.
I can see that the Washington State Tourist Bureau would be intrigued to get people to come by showing these and saying we have 36 ways to look at Mount Rainier, and we'd love you to add to it. Tell us what you see.
I'll give them your phone number, or I'll give you their phone number, and you can call them. How about
Yes,
that?
they would. Oh, what a great tourist attraction!
So
And now we're starting to play. Yes.
So now we're back in Seattle, not in an aerial view, but Seattle has a kind of a playful attitude about what to do in the summer. And that little yellow boat there you see is a floating hot tub. And they have a whole fleet of these with a sort of it's an actual wood stove that's submerged in it. And you sit next to it and just float around in the lake.
Wow.
And
Now, speaking of playful, can we have us looking through this painting again?
I can try.
Let's see if we can get it. There we are. Wow. Oh, it takes away, but it has its own charm.
Yeah,
Now
looks like you're floating in the tub.
Now you're a lover of James Joyce, who spent his whole life writing about the city he grew up in and then fled to the European continent.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So is doing this with your hometown, right?
Mm-hmm.
How does that?
Well, it really brings together a whole lot of memories and impressions I've had, for decades. Climbing the mountain, hiking around it.
Mm.
It's always been part of my life, and so yeah, it was. It's really meaningful. I can see how Joyce, without ever going back to Dublin, kept a connection to it in his writing, and it meant a lot to him. I can understand that.
Now, 36 ways of looking at your childhood growing up. One writer I love, George Herbert Mead, an American philosopher, said, a different George Washington crosses Valley Forge every generation, because they have a different understanding of who he is each time.
Oh, I see. Yes, when the new generation thinks about him.
Yes, or certainly with our beloved Thomas Jefferson and the scandal about his having a 14-year-old black mistress.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely changes
our perspective of
our
him.
perspective, but I hope not losing how wonderful he is. Maybe some people might call him a hypocrite. All men are created equal. But he was able to be very human and still rise to that rallying cry.
Correct. Yes.
So do you experience your childhood in a different way? I once wrote a haiku called, "It's never too late to be a happy child."
Well, that's interesting. I mean, what was the question again?
Do you experience
My childhood?
your childhood and your city in a different way in you? I mean, an example would be I had a very brutal mother
Mm-hmm.
who would hit me if she didn't like what I was doing, whack, whack, and then really hit me if I was crying. Boys don't cry, stop crying. You make me feel like I'm a lousy mother, stop crying, now. And we struggled, and she eventually became one of the most devoted mothers that my neighbors have ever seen, and told me that. And so I have these two mothers inside.
Mm.
And I wondered if you have maybe 36 Seattles inside after doing something like this, or not.
Well, I'll tell you, it reminds me of the first time my family went to Rainier. It was raining, and we never saw the mountain. But we pulled up to this side of the road that was just covered with like mud and sand that Mount Rainier sometimes washes during its floods. And there was a little bit of snow we could see. And they said, "This is Mount Rainier."
Ah, wow.
And that was the first trip. And, you know, out there the weather can be bad. And so that's, over that, you know, more and more layers of experience of the mountain have happened. But I have a rather funny picture in here of Rainier in the rain. I'll show you that.
Sure.
But as for Seattle, I mean, to tell you the truth, these things actually happen in Seattle. There are hot air balloons that you can take to look at the mountain and the floating hot tubs and whatever. But you know, Seattle is having some troubled time now too with its homelessness and all that sort of thing. That I didn't put in this series at all because I wanted to somehow just get grounded in what I really, really loved about the area.
Wow. And it seems to me, if I would do some of the things with my childhood, which was challenging, as I just shared, but I loved hiking down the Bronx River, climbing a fence and sneaking into the Bronx Zoo.
Oh, really? At night?
No, during the day.
Oh.
And
into the lion's cage?
Not into the cage. So the lion's cage was home. The Bronx Zoo
was home.
was paradise. So I would imagine if I could paint that or watercolor it, which is very, it's like, watercolor is like improv.
Imagine what it would bring forward.
Yes, it would, but it would help you cherish some of the really, and change your sense of who you are, I imagine.
I think so.
Yep, so that's, and when there's 36 ways of seeing your childhood environs, if I may borrow a word, that might help you realize it's unending. My place, I think our buddy James Joyce might feel that way. It just can be seen and experienced in so many rich, fun ways.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I hope that some of these pictures, if they're seen widely, will help people understand what I think about the mountain. And, you know, in that way, it takes on a life of its own and maybe colors other people's appreciation for the area as to how to look at it and whatever.
I imagine the Mount Rainier must be delighted.
Oh, I'll read you a haiku on that subject. So the one with the aerial view of Seattle. It says, "Snow-covered peaks gaze, unperturbed, on roads and town. Civilization."
Whoa! Okay, again, I'm going to read it slowly.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll go back to the...
Okay.
Hold on a second here. Let me just go back. This one.
Snow-covered peaks gaze, unperturbed, on roads and towns. Civilization.
It's as if the mountain is just rolling that last word over in its mouth, trying to figure out what is this thing.
What is going on?
Civilization.
What do you
Should I
guys,
care?
What are you guys doing? Love it. Love it.
So that's what the mountain thinks about us. So now we're getting very close. can't even fit Mount Rainier in the frame of the picture. And this is a little taqueria stop that my climbing buddy Rick Lindbergh loves and introduced me to. And you can imagine in this painting we're having one last food stop before we head up to the mountain. And this place really exists, and I highly recommend it.
Oh my! What is a taqueria?
What's that?
What is a taqueria?
Oh, it's a place that sells tacos, basically.
Oh.
I mean, I don't speak Spanish, but that's how
Oh,
I
I-
understand it.
Got it.
And tortas and burritos and quesadilla, as it's written on the truck there.
Oh, I can't see that. Yes.
And now,
I feel like I'm making friends with Mount Rainier, and it makes me want to go.
getting acquainted.
I've been to Washington State. My niece got married there.
Oh, she did.
Unfortunately, it wasn't a lasting marriage, but the marriage was fun.
So this is another aerial shot, I guess. It's near Crystal Mountain, if that means anything to you, ski area.
No.
But we are about to go up the mountain. But what I was really struck with this is that you can see the glaciers here, those big white swaths on the mountain, and they're very, very impressive. Most of the climbers climb up those rather than the cliffs because the cliffs are really poor rock and it's very crumbly and dangerous. But these glaciers spread out almost like the arms of some kind of creature, if you can see that.
And the glaciers are in white?
In white.
Yes.
And that black part is a very imposing wall that you can see from Seattle called Willis Wall. Just a terrific area.
And these you painted from your imagination? Is that?
No, I had lots of props and skills and research. I often get onto what's that thing called, Google Planet or something like that,
And you could look?
and you can actually fly around and position. I could position myself just like this.
Oh my.
It's an amazing software.
Wow.
So the graphics aren't very good, but in terms of getting the perspective right, it's really, really helpful for a painter who's trying to, depict something more or less realistically.
And it's also very abstract the different shapes and colors and how
Yeah,
they-
I try not to do an entire realistic painting. For one thing, it's not a good idea because the eye concentrates on one particular thing in a painting. If you have terrific detail up in the corners and they're of no importance whatsoever, the eye, it's wasted on the eye, and it just kind of diffuses the attention.
I think I'm going to start doing this with people I love. 36 ways of looking at my beloved friend Michelle. I don't know if they'll talk to me after that, but I can't wait to try, because it's true. Right? People are very different every moment,
Right.
especially if we're aware.
Right. Oh, and I just wanted to say, I wanted to acknowledge all the people that contributed to the haikus, because it was done as a group effort, and there were some family members and friends, and it was my wife Molly, her sister Mary Flannery, my friend Steve Jacques, my sister Lisa Ramel, Brian Pavolny, and Lynn Zawada, and Rick Lindbergh, my climbing buddy and painter friend.
Because you climb mountains, right?
Yeah, with Brian and with Rick and a bunch of other people.
And the difference between climbing them and painting them is?
They're hard to do at the same time.
Yes.
And I'll show you in the next painting. Here's a fellow. He's just a few hundred feet from the top of the mountain, coming up a very steep glacier. And he's totally focused on what's in front of his face. He's got 2 ice axes. He's wearing crampons. These are the things that keep him from sliding and tumbling off the mountain. And I tried to depict the kind of challenge there is there and focus for this effort of climbing a really big mountain like Rainier. And at the same time, anytime he looks around, he's immersed in this beautiful visual field.
Here's not much in much of these paintings. You're not just nice. It seems that the dark feelings, energies in nature
Yes,
are,
they're very stark.
yes,
So in this painting, it's depicting a lot of these climbs usually take place before the sun even comes up, because once the sun hits the slopes, they start to melt, and then there's more avalanche danger.
got it.
So this fellow, let's say, he probably started with a headlamp, and now it's dawn on the mountain, but in the valleys behind him, that's looking way, way down. It's still, the sun hasn't even risen yet.
Oh my.
So he's just bathed in bright, bright light from the glacier, and then you get this contrast with the darkness that you're referring to.
You make me want to climb mountains. I did it once. It was hard. We hiked to the, I think it's the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee.
Oh, yeah?
It's a long hike and a long hike back. Too much for a first-time hiker.
That usually happens the first time around.
So we didn't do that. I haven't done it. Oh, except Mount Sinai.
Oh, yes, you climbed there, didn't you?
Yes, it wasn't much, but it's one of the. This is a station break from Tim Ahern. It won't be long. It was one of the. I don't entirely know why, but one of the regrets in my life. We climbed Mount Sinai, just like you said,
Yes.
in pre-dawn. So we're there when the sun rises, and it makes it spectacular.
Oh, so you did just that. Well, because it gets so hot there, right?
Yes, that too. And then we're on our way down, and the guide said, "Don't stop, because if you stop, it'll be hard to keep going. You know, because you'll lose your momentum, and you'll just wanna. Because we've climbed all the way up pre-dawn, and we're going down. It's getting hotter, and I'm with my first lover. I was so blessed by her, Simone Gayer. I even remember her name, thank God. And halfway down, she wants to stop. And I'm not sensitive to her at all. I said, the guide said, we have to keep going, let's keep going. And I'm very sorry about that. I don't know why. Maybe because it was Mount Sinai and I wasn't in any way open to taking in her feelings.
Well, did you save her from a lot of discomfort, maybe, from getting overheated?
I could have, but I at least I remember once my present beloved friend Michelle, we go to the gathering of her colleagues at work and her boss,
Yeah.
and they're serving barbecued chicken, and I'm just loving eating. I don't have my rules for eating when I'm eating out. And as we leave, I said, wow, we had a great time. And she says, what do you mean we had a great time? I was with my boss there. Don't speak for me. And so finally, it was about 50 years later, 40 years later, 45 years later, thanks to Michelle saying, what do you mean we white men? I now am very careful in saying, I had a good time, what about you? And at least listening and hearing. But I didn't then. And somehow the combination of the seminal moment in human history, the Ten Commandments,
Mm-hmm.
and the Mach macho insensitivity.
Got your
Yeah.
paternalism
Yeah,
boiling.
patriarchy. So, Simone, I don't think you're alive, but you might be watching. And thanks to Michelle now,
He didn't mean it.
I'm finally learning to listen to what women are feeling. Okay, back. That was a station break. Back to 36 Ways.
Okay, so one of the haikus for this one is chips of ice spraying, axes and crampons clawing, feast for the eyes soon.
Oh my, I love it. I'm going to read it again.
Sure.
Chips of ice spraying, axes and crampons clawing, feast for the eyes soon.
So he has no time for the view right now.
No, but he's gonna. There's hope. That is a hopeful haiku. This is a hope. In case you missed it, this is a hopeful watercolor. Don't pay attention to the man groaning as he's climbing the mountain.
So this is on top. This is a different approach. You can see this very colorful cliff down there. That's on the southern side. It's called St. Andrew's Rock and Sunset Amphitheater. And that is my my brother-in-law. Very jauntily. He'd already put down his pack, and he's so happy he's up there, and he's walking up to the rim, that little reddish area with the snow in the very front, is the crater at the very top of Mount Rainier. The steam is actually coming out of all the time. So if you end up there in the middle of a storm and there's no way back down, and you're lost your tent, there are these little cracks you can crawl into, and you can stay warm and survive the night.
Wow.
People have done that. I think somebody crashed a plane up there once and survived that way.
And it still looks as if this inanimate landscape is alive.
Well,
And is not necessarily friendly.
but beautiful, right?
I would say awesome. I can feel they might, maybe because I'm not a climber, that they might hurt me big time if I'm not very respectful.
Well, my brother-in-law Ron passed away a couple of years ago, but I just like to think of him up there on Rainier right now.
That's lovely.
It's his happy place.
Remembered.
And there's a haiku about him. Light load, happy legs, walking to the crater's lip, the gods' rock garden.
Wow, maybe this is for all of us. Light load. Happy legs. Walking to the crater's lip. The gods' rock garden. It might be a haiku for our time, right? We might be coming to the lip of the crater in our climate change, our nuclear war possibilities.
Reminds me of a line in Finnegan's Wake that someone's dancing on the edge of a volcano backwards.
Wow. Wow. Well, even if we go, it's a lovely way to go with watercolors like this. Is that a respectful name, calling them watercolors?
Watercolors, it's done. Yeah, people say that.
And what do you use? You just say paintings.
Yeah, but they are watercolors.
Yes. Like women.
Watercolor is a lot of fun, by the way. I mean, when you really learn how to let the water with the color in it flow onto the wet paper, like when you're doing washes, big washes.
Wow.
It takes on a life of its own. It's really fascinating.
Oh my! So you're not in total control like in oil.
Right. But if you do make a mistake, you can actually paint in reverse. So you take, after it's dried, you take your brush with a little bit of water on it, and you get the paint that's already on there that you want to get rid of, you get it wet, you dry the paintbrush, and then you paint again, and the color disappears off the paper into the brush.
There's hope. There's hope for all of us. Just because it's there doesn't mean it has to stay there.
That's right. So, once upon a time, Mount St. Helens, its neighbor, exploded, as you might remember, and let off this huge ash cloud. And this is just the beginning of it. And this is a painting of two people sitting on top of Mount Rainier, watching this event just start to take place. Which, if anybody had done that, it really would have been awe-inspiring for sure. And this painting was inspired by actually a couple, the Christiansens, Suzanne and I can't remember the man's name, John. They were climbing Mount Adams, and they actually witnessed something very much like this. But since this is a series about Mount Rainier, I switched mountains and changed the perspectives. Even the clouds roaring out of Mount St. Helens were modified so it would be as if you were seeing them from Mount Rainier.
So it seems like with our environment, maybe even with people, if we don't like what we see, there's 35 other perspectives.
Just wait long enough.
Yes.
Didn't Mark Twain say something like that once about weather in New England?
If you don't like it, wait 5 minutes.
Something like that?
Yes.
So now we spent some time on top of Mount Rainier, and these two fellows brought their skis all the way up, and this is something people actually do. And they're skiing down the entire mountain, or at least down to where the snow line is. And it's a lot of fun, and I would never do it from Mount Rainier because I'm not a good enough skier. But up there, the very top is very icy, and it's it's melted into these sort of like little conical basins. So it's a pretty tricky skiing until you maybe drop down about 1,000 or 2,000 feet, and the snow gets softer. And these fellows are obviously in the softer snow. You can see they're kicking up a lot of powder and having a blast. And that little peak behind them is called Little Tahoma, and it's just a side peak on one of the ridges of Mount Rainier. Very picturesque, though.
Love it. If I was a good friend, I'd contact the Washington State tourist folks and tell them they must sell copies of this book to every group of tourists that come through.
And these are some of the views you get on the glaciers. They have these wide open blue crevasses with very dark bottoms. You can't really see the bottom sometimes. And there's sometimes pools of water that collect here and there that are nice and beautiful blue, and the ice lower down is a dark blue, and depending on the air conditions and the light conditions, the hills around the mountain are bluish.
Now, each of these paintings is rich in itself, but the way you're presenting it is by putting it in the context of 36 ways of viewing it. What does that do to the beauty and uniqueness of each of these paintings?
Yeah, I often wonder about that because I conceived it as a series, and I think some of them stand out on their own. I think somebody else has to answer that. I really don't know. It's I'm so immersed in the world of it all that I just can't tease them apart anymore, really. But I'm surprised when people look at them, they all have different favorites.
Oh my.
And
I couldn't choose. When Tim wrote me, he said, choose the ones you want to do on the show. I said, you must be kidding. Like devoted father choosing which child. They're all so, maybe I don't know enough about art, but they're all so worthy of being meditated on, which is, I guess, what you do when you make the watercolor. You're just spending some time on this one view.
yes, it has its own little world of, getting things the way you want them. And some of the nicest things are, sometimes when a painting's done, I think, oh gosh, I wished I'd done that left side better. And I go back to it a few days later, I think, that's really nice.
Oh,
That's my favorite part of the painting.
Wow.
I still don't understand that.
I'm going to cry. Oh my. Well, I'm just letting it in. I mean, I need to talk because this is a television show, but I could just be with these as you were when you were making the watercolor. How long did it take to do this?
In general, I mean, some of them took much longer, but in general, about 4 days. Let's say 6 days.
Oh, so you devoted yourself to this.
Mm-hmm. What you have to do is you have to let certain depths of color to dry before you get on to the next ones. And so you can't rush them really. And I also found that any painting I completed in one day was nothing like any in this series. They lacked a certain kind of integration and wholeness that I was looking for. So I really don't recommend trying to do a painting in one day anymore. And that's a problem if you go out into the wilds. You usually don't have 3 or 4 days to work on one painting. All you can do is get an idea of the sense of light at the time or perspective or something, but not the whole painting. At least I can't.
And could you expand a little more on integration and wholeness?
Well, I mean, I don't know how to talk about art very well, but there's a way that you have to balance the colors, and the contrasts have to be coherent enough that it has a focus and an object that really comes through, and the other parts support it. And so, like in this example, if some of those back ridges were much darker, the eye might go to them and go like, "Oh, is that what I'm supposed to be looking at?"
Oh, I see. So it has to work like a symphony.
Right.
It has
So
to work together, or a good movie.
So, like in this one, it's Little Tahoma is very dark and commanding, and then its ridge on the right is interesting. It's like, oh, these are real mountains, and then in the front, you have sort of this. It's a contrast of the depth of the crevasse, but it's also a peak. It looks like a peak. It's a triangle, let's say, but it's a study of ice colors, and so creating those so that they work together, and then the blue watery spillage here and there is just supposed to be kind of fantastical. Like, is that what life is really like up there? It's like something you wouldn't necessarily expect. So all these things are going on, but they're not tripping over each other, hopefully.
No. And many other meanings beside, I mean, that front snow with the hole, really, right?
Mm-hmm. The crevasse. It's like a big split in the ice.
Yes. And that could just, more than words could say what that could bring up for us.
Well, I like this one too because the perspective is almost someone standing with one leg on either side of the crevasse.
Oh my!
It's like, oh, isn't this peaceful? Isn't this beautiful? Isn't this guy a little crazy to be standing there? Shall I go on?
Sure.
So now we're on the eastern side of the mountain, and it's more horse country over there. It's Washington State sort of has a divide. It's more metropolitan on the, let's say, on the coast side, and on the eastern side it starts to get drier, and people get around by horses, and there's a lot of fishing and big Indian reservations. So this is where we're coming out of one biozone into another, and this is a group of horse people who are enjoying the high country. It's probably the first time they're up for the season. There's plenty of snow still, but it's starting to melt on the lower reaches. The lakes still are rimmed in ice, but they're not totally frozen, and they're probably obviously enjoying it a lot. There's not a lot of bugs necessarily at that point.
Mm.
And in this painting, the woman wearing the red coat, that's my sister-in-law that I painted in there. And the one wearing the slightly reddish coat, that's my sister, Lisa. I just wanted to include them in there because they're horse people, and they lent me a lot of pictures of them on horses for this particular painting.
I'm getting, as I say words, more silent as we go along, just being somewhat overwhelmed by it, actually.
And my sister, Lisa, wrote this haiku because she's a horse person. She knows aching, chafing, hot, doing what others dare not, see what isn't seen.
Wow! I'm going to read it once. Aching, chafing, hot, doing what others dare not, see what isn't seen. Oof. That's as eerie as these mountains. Well, we only have 4.5 minutes. Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, what should we do in the remaining time?
Oh my.
Well, why don't we take a break and have a couple brewskis?
Yes, why not?
So this out there's a beer called Rainier, of course, and everybody's familiar with it. This is going along with that Western theme on the. I say Western theme, but it's on the eastern side of Mount Rainier, and these people are just hanging out by a fence, enjoying themselves, and the mountain is getting more and more exposed the more they drink their beers.
I see.
And there's a lot of artificiality in this painting, though. If you look at the yellow, it's supposed to be a field, let's say, of grass, dry grass. But I sort of took a technique of Matisse's where he's very decorative and flat. And I just featured a lot of grasses there, almost like they're laid down on a piece of paper, let's say, or something like that. But I'm really pleased with the the effect that it creates in this painting.
Well, it's fun in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Although, as you were saying, there's a wonderful book you'd love by David Abrams about, I forget his name at the moment. It's The Spell of the Sensuous. It might have been his first book. And he's in a wilderness and loving it, and then he sees a sign in words, and that just takes away the magic of it.
Yeah.
And so this is fun. These containers of beer don't take away the magic. They're part of it, a playful part of it. It's almost nature versus beer containers.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a fun association with the beer and the mountain here.
Yes.
It's sort of playing with it a little bit.
Yes. Which side are we on? Well, we have 2 minutes to go. maybe we should get back to looking at us
Okay.
and in eloquent prose sum up what we've experienced.
Yeah.
Easier for me to ask. But he's good with words. As I told you.
Oh, that's for me to do.
That's for you to do. Yes, no, easy for me to ask. It's my show.
I've been talking all during.
I know, I loved it. I'm spoiled. By now I am spoiled.
Well, we got through 15 of them, so
We can have we're almost ready for a sequel. 21 more ways.
21 more ways.
So I'm just awed though, beyond, although I'm talking. I don't think I'll be the same after seeing all of these. And this was just the beginning. Help. 36.
I'm very honored for you to say that.
Yes, oh my God. 36 ways. People are not going to like me. I'm going to say, okay, 36 ways of looking at my beloved roommate. You could be this or that.
Test it out, see if it works.
It is true. It's true, though. There's an unlimited number of ways we can see ourselves and everyone else. Infinite, really, which can bring us into spiritual places we have no time for. We can leave you with the sense of infinite ways of looking at everything.